back to the Sabbath at midnight. Go ahead, Gary, and start it off.
Well, thank you for inviting me to your podcast, and so happy to be with you and talking to your listeners. And we're going to be talking today about a topic that I think a lot of people are very much interested in, end-time prophecy, and sort of how we start to get our head around where we are and where we're going, and try and take some confusion out of all the different things that you might hear people talk about. So I thought maybe we would start today with Jesus, because one of the things that I like to do in my approach, and it's probably the most important thing, is I tend to put all things around what Jesus said versus putting what Jesus said around what the prophet said or what a biblical teacher says. So I like to start with that. He's the spirit of prophecy, and he's the word of God. And he gave a chronology for us in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 17 and Luke 21 that pretty much lays down a template. And in that template, he gives us a chronological set of orders, a chronological set of events in order, and it's sort of highlighted by the word then as you go through. And it's quite common, and it's used elsewhere in the New Testament and in Mark and in Luke as well. And then is the Greek word tot. That means at that time, then, thereafter. So it's not topical that it's range, it's chronological, and it's translated as such into English, and even when you take it back to Greek, it is chronological. So he gives us a sequence of events, and in that set of events, he lays out three overarching signs. One is the fig tree generation, that all of these events are going to happen, and that they'll all happen in this one generation, and that his, all things like heaven and earth will pass away, but his words in this instruction will not fall away. Like this is set, and it happens in one generation. And you have the days of Noah that follows as one of those archetypical signs, which is important for context for the rest of, for the signs that he's overlaying. And then the first archetypical overarching sign that we get is early on in Matthew 24. And I like to use Matthew 24 as the template, lay Mark 13 with additional details over on that, and then Luke 17 and 21 with details onto that, just the extra details, just to keep the chronology simple and sort of clear. And he begins with four sort of apocalyptic, if I can use those terms, signs, and they're called the beginning of sorrows. And these beginning of sorrows is also translated or understood as birth pangs, so depending on what translation that you're reading. And so when you see references in the Old Testament to these birth pangs, that's defining the allegory of the sorrow. So you're going to see both of those terms used throughout the Old and the New Testament. And it's an important context to have, because these signs will get stronger as they go. And we'll see that in all of the end-time prophecies, particularly with the Christian prophecies of the New Covenant in the New Testament, and that they'll get stronger and happen more often. So these four birth pangs are wars and rumors of war, and earthquakes, and famine, and pestilence. Now you're going to notice that these birth pangs are the same catastrophes that happen in the seal openings of Revelation 6. These are the same catastrophes that are happening with the trumpet blasts of, Revelation 7 through essentially Revelation 14. You have the same catastrophe in the wrath bowls being poured out as you get to the year of the Lord's wrath at the end of end time prophecy. So they're just getting stronger. So much so you have 25% destruction of the whole world, of all of the population, of all of the waters, of all of the vegetation in the seal judgments. But that's not Armageddon. It will seem like Armageddon, and some of the princes will think it's Armageddon because they're hiding in caves in Revelation 6 at the end of it. Right. And then 33% in the trumpets, and then it would be 100% in the wrath bowls, except that Jesus steps in or all flesh would be destroyed. So he doesn't quite let it get to that, but if it was to continue any longer, then it would be ultimate destruction. So this is going to play out these birth pangs, not just in the seals, the trumpets, and the wrath bowls, but completely throughout the generation of the fig tree. And in my understanding, if we are in the fig tree generation, and I think we probably are, so when we start to look for what these sorrows might be as we view today and going forward, then we need a starting point.
Right.
And for me, you've got in the last sort of 150 years, or not quite, let's say in just over 100 years of things that are laying out in the modern era, you've got some events that start to pop up. One would be that the declaration of the nation of Israel by the visible southern kingdom that was dispersed by the Romans versus the lost tribes who have not yet awakened yet, of their independence in 1947, and then their war in 1948. Another one might be 1967 with the taking of Jerusalem. For me, those are the two more important ones because Judah has to be back in the covenant land. But more importantly, they also have to be in control of Jerusalem. So for that to happen, then they need to have taken Jerusalem, which happens in 1967. And further to that, we have the question of how long a generation is. So Exodus is 40 years. Book of the Psalms tells us 70 years. Genesis 6:3 is 120 years. Now, that whole generation doesn't have to be completed. But what it suggests is that sometime, I think, after 1967, within that time frame, the sorrows start to pile up. And they'll get stronger as they go. And we've got a lot of things that have happened in the last 5 to 10 years that are really looking rather concerning right now. People are asking, what's going on? There seems to be something amiss, something wrong. And I think that we are just in the start of those birth pangs, and we want to be very, very careful going forward that we get the chronology right so that we don't lose our credibility.
Sure.
So I'll leave it at that just for an opening and see what kind of questions you might have on it.
The birth, not the birth pangs, but the fig tree generation. Some people are not clear on what the fig tree generation actually all entails. Can you expound on that for the listeners?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a very good question because, Jesus is laying out something that should be kind of understood or easily discernible. Otherwise, it would just be, he would just say the last generation. But he doesn't. He says the fig tree generation. And what's interesting, particularly in the Matthew account, just before he's going to go into the temple and create chaos there for the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he takes a fruit from a tree, and it's a fig tree. Mm-hmm. And he says this tree is barren of fruit, and he kills the tree. And so this is a direct message to the people of Judah. This is saying that when the fig tree, as he says in his oration on the sign of the end times, when you see this tree in bloom, know that the season is near, and that this fig tree is prophetic allegory for the southern kingdom. So in the Old Testament, we have the northern nation of Israel and the southern nation of Judah that splits after King Solomon. They have a civil war. And that in prophetic allegory, the vine is the northern kingdom. And in the south, you have the fig tree that is used in reference to Judah and the southern kingdom. So this is a reference that was targeted at the visible southern kingdom of survivors who came back from Babylon, that this was an allegory that they would understand, and an allegory that the coming church should understand. If prophecy and prehistory was taught to the faithful on a regular basis, people would understand this as sort of common fact. So when he's pointing to that fig tree, that's the generation when Judah is in Jerusalem, where that fig tree was killed, and in the covenant land, which they began to assert as their own in 1947. So again, leaning back to Jerusalem as being captured, that is probably the start date for probably a 70 or 120 year generation.
Wow. So from 1967, if we take 70 years, we're looking at, possibly 2037 and around that time. No one really knows the date, but just, it's conjecture. But I mean, that's, probably, if it is 70 years, that's what we're looking at. And we see things quickening, like, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war. There's a lot of talk that, it's the commencement of World War III. And we have all these signs in the sky. We have that, comet coming by. It hasn't been seen in 50,000 years.
A lot of UFO sightings on a daily basis now in the mainstream media.
UFO sightings, a lot of spiritual things happening out in the desert being reported in other areas. And we have the Great Reset. It's still, ongoing with Klaus Schwab leading that. So those are, current events and the earthquakes. There's been, obviously there's been earthquakes throughout history, but I've noticed quite a few more.
And even the weather's been extremely different.
Yeah, like
even here,
it's
been very different. It's colder than usual.
Yeah, like here in California, they were, talking about drought. Oh, drought. Now the, snow cap is just, it's just amazing now, and there's more storms coming. So
I actually like the weather change though.
And I wonder if all these are just contrived, Gary.
And I think that's the way to view it, is that these are contrived catastrophes, and that it's not God punishing us.
Right.
Remember, we're to be saved from the wrath. We'll be part of the tribulation, but we're going to be saved from the wrath, and this is not the wrath of God yet. This is the beginning of sorrows, and they are contrived. It's the forces who are polytheist that are wanting to have a rendezvous with destiny. They want to bring about the end time before the ordained time so that they can discredit God if they can. But of course, they will have to settle for the ordained time. But they're always marching forward. And they're able to go forward in the fig tree generation, but at a certain pace again. And because Michael is fighting these, he doesn't stop the beast empires from rising, and we haven't seen the beast empire rise yet. But he does prevent Antichrist from coming to power until he sits down. That can't happen, and that'll happen at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So when we look at contrived catastrophes, when we're talking about that, is that they are creating these disasters and calamities and then saying we have a solution. And if they get stopped, then they just create another scenario and say we have the solution. So, and you're going to see these sorrows, these birth pangs starting to work together, so that if you have large natural disasters, because Luke enters in a few more details onto the earthquakes that would spread that out to be more than just the earthquakes, you're going to get pestilence and you're going to get famines that come along with it. If you're going to have wars, you're going to get pestilence and you're going to have famines of it. If you're using weapons of a significant size, you may be triggering more earthquakes by damaging the Earth's crust. I mean, you have these things that can just sort of go in circles, but they will work in tandem, but they're all created to drive people into the open arms of the globalists, because they need this world government and this universal religion to set up their end game of evolving into godhood, as is understood in polytheist religions and New Age, as people would understand it, more common in North America. So when we're looking at what's going on in the world today, is they are trying to bring about a scenario where they can have world government. And so all the disasters are going to work around that. So when you see pestilence, you can expect more to be done on that level so that they can create this need to do things in a transnational basis. So, after the fallout of the last pestilence, I mean, you had a meeting with the G20 and the B20 in the fall, and now you have the same group of the B20 meeting with the G20 that are meeting in Davos. And if people don't know how powerful that representation is, the G20 represents 80% of the world GDP and 75% of the trade. And they're in one group, and they're working with the B20, which is the Davos crew that reports to the Committee of 300. But that's a different rabbit hole. But where I'm going with this is that they want to do a complete reset, and they're doubling down. And so they looked at things like the vaccine passports that were very much decentralized around the world, and there wasn't this one sort of common system. So after you have that disaster, what do they learn? They want to get a worldwide passport that they'll be presenting to the WHO organization in a few months at their annual meeting to put in place. And it's going to be a digital vaccine card that is, let me just sort of back it up here a little bit. It's a vaccine card that's an endeavor to move towards what they call interoperability of systems, including mechanisms that validate vaccination while still respecting sovereignty. So they need regulations and things that are coming along. They want to adopt a digital passport that has robust guidelines on it, not only for vaccines, but where you go. So they want it to be able to track you. And they're wanting to work this into the system like with Alibaba and Apple has, which is the social credit system, and work the digital currency into that so that everything you do, everything that is tracked, everything that is recorded, and none of this can be destroyed in cryptocurrency that would be linked to it, will prevent you from doing anything unless you're approved. It's as simple as you may not be able to go to the store and buy something if you don't have the right social credit. That's extreme, but it will be sort of introduced. You can't go to concerts. You can't go to entertainment. You can't travel. You may not get loans you want. You may not be able to have the size of credit line on a credit card that you may want, things like that. So they're doubling down. And Mr. Schwab, he announced at the G&B 20 in October that it's time for a deep and structural restructuring of the world, that they want to double down on the Great Reset that will solve all the fundamental problems that are lacking the required social cohesion. And they want to do it in terms of economical, political, sociological, and ecological, and in the term of the crisis that we're facing and all of that, they want to be able to do solutions for that. And his word is they want a transformation of the world as a multi-poly world. And they want to have government to have in that declaration, government to control everything. And they want to have complete systems in place to be able to tap into those. And so what they're doing, they're not going to get that all right away, because people are saying, okay, we've got some issues, but we're not ready to do that. So you need to crank up the screws on the catastrophes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and from a geopolitical scenario, they have to get to what the Club of Rome, which works in conjunction with the Committee of 300 as well, is to the 10 groups of nations that they've divided everything up into. They're running into an issue that they've got countries, let's say like Russia today or China, who are saying, we don't like the European-dominated system that you want to impose on us. We're not against the New Order. We want a larger role. And so they're going to continue to push back. But to develop into these groups of nations, you're going to see the pushback will include, I want more countries. I want to rebuild my empire of old, as Putin is starting to do. You're going to see the Chinese do the same thing. And that's going to lead to the wars and the rumors of wars, along with the wars that are an anarchy that's going to be created by all of the fixed and corrupted elections that are starting to happen around the world today, like what's going down in Brazil and Peru today. We're going to see more of that. And one might make an argument for what's happened closer to home in terms of the integrity of those elections. That's going to become more common as well, because the only way they're going to get to it is through the Chinese National Socialism on a global scale basis, where you have one party rule, one media, and one party to vote for. And so you see that going on today, but it's going to require a persecution, which is also going to be taking part as these birth pangs start to come together. So I would be looking for a lot more wars, and people will be getting more apocalyptic as these wars start to break out and as we get deeper in it. But there's still many more to come. I mean, we don't know how much turmoil we're going to see even before we get to the seal openings, because you have to have enough calamity created that people will welcome the globalists to insert their empire, and that we're not going to move into the last 7 years until those 10 kings are established. And they're going to require Babylon, the universal religion, to bring that together. And the false prophets are going to have to come out and predict these false calamities as well, to convert to the true religion, or we're going to destroy ourselves from the face of the world. The Babel syndrome that happened with Nimrod, where he said, we need to stay together, otherwise we'll be dispersed across the earth and wiped out from the face of the earth. So we are in that process today, and we are going to go through tribulation. And Christians need to understand that we're told in the New Testament we're going to go through tribulation. And in Revelation 2, 8 to 10, you get these 10 days of tribulation that are talked about.
Yeah, those 10 days. Do you think those are literally 10 days or 10 years?
I think they're 10 years. I think that if we sort of follow the line that Jesus is providing us, and that he is telling us that there is going to be affliction that immediately follow the birth pangs. So that would indicate before the start of the last 7 years. And that word is the Greek word philippes, which is the word that is used to translate tribulation. And it's the same word used for tribulation in Revelation 7 that the saints come out of. It's the same word that's used in Revelation 2 that I mentioned for the 10 days. It's the same word for tribulation that is used in the Great Tribulation after the midpoint of the last 7 years that Matthew talks about, not seen since the beginning of creation. And interestingly enough, in Mark 13, where it talks about this great tribulation that hasn't been seen since the beginning, that happens after the abomination, just as in Matthew 24, that word isn't translated as tribulation. It's translated as affliction, but it goes back to the same Greek word. And so this begins the great affliction. The great tribulation is the time of Jacob's trouble, which is the same equivalent cognate word in Hebrew for the tribulation of Judah and Israel in the last 3.5 years. But my point is you're going to have tribulation before the seals are open. You're going to have tribulation in the first 3.5 years. And then there's going to be another great tribulation that leads to wrath in the last 3.5 years. So yeah, I think when we look at Jesus' instructions, he says there's going to be infliction. We get the chronological order of events, and then he gives us Daniel as the midpoint marker of the last 7 years. And then he says we should go back and review Daniel to understand what he's talking about, where in Daniel 9:27, Daniel provides the last 7 years, and in the midpoint of that last week of years, where all vision and prophecy is going to be fulfilled, and sin is reconciled for, and all things happen that are depicted for that end time, that is split into 3.5 year periods, split by the abomination when Antichrist will take power. And what's also interesting is that if you place Daniel's prophecies on top of Jesus' chronology, they match perfectly. And that leads us to putting Revelation not only together with Daniel exactly as the same sort of prophetic allegory and chronology, but also onto what Jesus said. And when you do that, all of your contradictions start to disappear. So Revelation has all sorts of passages that are describing the 7 years, usually in half form, so 3.5 years. So like Judah will be protected in the wilderness for 3.5 years in Revelation 12. That's at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. You have the two witnesses that are preaching for 3.5 years. That happens at the beginning. You have Antichrist who will reign in Revelation 13 for 3.5 years. So everything revolves around the same allegory, the same time frame, and you can rely on them as markers and benchmarks for the prophetic allegory. And in this case, with the week of years, the 70 weeks, they're all identifying for us that a day, as in the last 7 days of the last week, is a year. And so, days, you can have several different meanings, as with any sort of word that you would define in Greek or in Hebrew, but you have to match it up consistently with Scripture as it's applied and within the narrative and within the overall chapter. So when you go through that process, I think it's definitely saying there's 10 years of tribulation that's going to happen.
I had a question, Gary, about do you believe in a pre-rapture, in a rapture pre-tribulation?
I know I hope for that, yeah, right? And a lot of people believe in that, but we have to be careful with that. I think Scripture tells us, and Jesus' chronology makes it pretty clear that it's not a tribulation event. And especially when you start to understand that tribulation is a completely different word than wrath.
Okay.
And wrath is used as it comes out of orge and thumas, and it's used for that year of the year of the Lord's wrath in the New Testament. And then they use 4 words for it in Hebrew.
And also another thing too, a lot of people that don't know too much about the Bible, when it says only 144,000 people are going to go to heaven, they interpret that as only 144,000 people are going to go to heaven. So I wanted you to kind of just expound on that a little bit. Exactly what does that mean, so people don't think that there's only 144,000 people going.
Yeah. So in Revelation 7, you're introduced to the 144,000, and then they're seen in heaven in Revelation 14. So Revelation 6 through Revelation 14 are basically giving you the first 3.5 years. It might have a little bit just before in there with the opening of the seals. And you get a summary beginning in Revelation 14:7, 14:7 of the last 3.5 years, which you get the details that follow in Revelation 15 through 19. And what's interesting is in Revelation 14:6, you get the gospel being preached by the angels. So when Jesus talks about right after the birth sorrows, and he's talking about the chronology and the affliction, the tribulation that's going to take place, you have the 2 witnesses that are going to preach and prophesy for 3.5 years. You got the 144,000, and then you have the angel that seals it off at the midpoint. And then in Revelation 14:7, you're actually told this is the hour of the judgment that has come. This is the temptation and the trial that we're going to be reserved from, just as we're also told that happens earlier in Revelations was talking in the churches, just says we're not going to be part of the wrath. But this is still the days of the trumpet. The wrath bowls have yet to be poured out. So the 144,000, they are from each of the tribes of Israel. And they're going to be preaching, and awakening lost Israel and calling them by name and preaching the gospel to the world at the same time as well. And they're shown as first fruits in heaven, which implies that they are martyred in the first 3.5 years. And that it's interesting in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, you have God reserving the firstborn of Israel. So you wonder whether or not he's been reserving these firstborn from the beginning to come out and preach in the end time. Just my speculation in terms of sort of matching that up. But they're from the tribes of Israel, and they have a specific goal. And in the resurrection sequence, that we are provided, the sequence is Christ, the first fruits, and then when he comes, those who are asleep in Jesus, not martyred, and those who are still alive. And then you're going to have a resurrection in Ezekiel 37 in the last 3.5 years as well for Israel and Judah at the time of the Exodus, before the wrath bowl. So everything sort of comes back into play. But getting back to the 144,000, these are part of the first fruits. The first fruits are defined as, in Revelation 6, those who died giving the testimony of Jesus. And they are told to wait for those to come out of the Great Tribulation in Revelation 7, who are going to die like themselves. Mm-hmm. This is all part of the first 3.5 years. So when I look at that, it's indicating that we're going to go through tribulation. We won't go through the wrath, but rapture has not happened at this point. And then a lot of people say, well, but I've been told, and there's a significant piece of the pre-trib rapture put on when John is told to come up to heaven, that signals the rapture. So that happens early on in Revelations, and the accounting of what John is going through 1 through 4 in the prophecies of the churches and the letters going out to the churches. So just let me run people through what the wording actually says here.
Sure.
Because it's really, really important to know that this is not talking about rapture. This is something we need to get clear, because it just you start to get into contradictions if you believe that he actually went to heaven. So it says in Revelation 1:1 that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which is given to John by an angel. Okay, it's a revelation. What does the word revelation mean? Well, revelation is the Greek word apocalypse, which is where apocalyptic sort of comes from as it gets transliterated in English. And it means to appear, a manifestation, a revealing, and an instruction. Right? So as it starts to go through and give us some more details on this, and we're not told who that angel is. I mean, it could be Gabriel, it could be Michael, it could be another angel. We're not told who that angel is. Sure. Which is, if it was Gabriel or Michael, you think it would be named, so it might be another angel. And he's instructed to bear witness to everything that he's going to see in this revelation, in this instruction. So this is indicating a vision like Ezekiel had, like Isaiah had. It's indicating a vision that he's going to be going through, and I'll explain this a little bit further in just a minute, as opposed to somebody being taken to heaven like Elijah, like Enoch. That's a whole different thing that's going on, where they're actually taken up. Ezekiel is seeing the throne visions in a vision. Isaiah in Isaiah 6 is taken up to heaven in a vision, not physically. This is the same basis that's happening here. and he's going to have this revelation to bear witness to everything that he sees in this vision. And it says in that vision, it's the testimony of the word of God. And then as you move on into some of the details of this vision, it says that John was stated to be in the Spirit on the Lord's day. So he's in spirit to see a vision. He's not physically going to heaven. And when he saw the door opened in heaven and a voice saying, "Come up hither, and I will show you these things that must be hereafter." So he's going up in vision, in spirit. And we know that there's a spirit of prophecy that's talked about in the New Testament. And that is the spirit or ruach of prophecy. It's also defined in the Old Testament. So we're told he's in the spirit of prophecy in Revelation 4:2. So this is being done in a visionary basis. He is not being transformed instantaneously into his new body,
right,
like the people at the rapture are going to be. He's not suffered the first death. He comes actually back and he writes the letters to the churches. So he didn't go anywhere. He's just in vision that he went somewhere, and it's being shown to him as to what's going to be happening. And as we go through it, we understand that Jesus is the spirit of the prophecy. So he's in spirit with Jesus, with the angel, to see this prophecy. So this whole idea that people rely on, that he physically went up as a sign for the rapture then, which makes it a pre-trib rapture, it never says anything about gathering or transforming. It has, there's the only way you can make that connection is to reimagine and reinvent what it says. And when you realize that he later comes down, and so he hasn't been transformed into heaven, and we haven't seen Enoch come back yet, and we haven't seen Elijah come back yet. Yeah. It's totally out of sync with how things have happened in those physically taken to heaven sort of applications. So we're told to wait patiently, just like those in Revelation 6, which are the martyred people from the time of Jesus until the start of the last 7 years when the 144,000 come out. They're told to wait a little longer for those to be martyred like them. And then rapture is going to happen after that based on the sequence that were provided, Christ the first fruits, and then when he comes. So the two witnesses would be first fruits as well. So they actually suffer the first death, and they've been preaching for 3.5 years, and then they go up to heaven.
I had a question about those two witnesses. As I was reading the book of Revelation, I noticed that, I mean, these two witnesses, as it says, they have a lot of power. And, one of the things that it says is that, God said no one's going to be able to touch him. Anybody that touches him is going to be, severely punished or, harmed. And another thing, too, it talks about how they can breathe fire from their mouth, and they could, shut the power of heaven, control the rain, the weather, all these amazing things. What do you think about all that? Like breathing, fire from their mouth? Are they invincible because it can't be touched? I mean, it's just
yeah, it's going to be an interesting time for sure, and the people of the world are going to hate them. In fact, once the one who comes up out of the abyss overcomes them, they almost break out in like a Christian party and Christmas party and celebration, right, of the death of these, and then they're taken up to heaven. And this is going to start the time of trial, right? The preaching is over, yeah. and the last 3.5 years are going to begin, and Antichrist is going to be crowned. But yeah, they are going to prophesy horrible things, wow. And they're going to prophesy horrible things that the world is going to do to itself.
But before all this,
and
go ahead, Gary.
You're also going to have false prophets that are also prophets of Babylon, so that people believe in them, that they have prophecies of contrived catastrophes that they're going to bring about to have them convert. And then Antichrist is going to have false prophets, and the ultimate one, the false prophet, who makes the way for Antichrist, like Elijah did, and as John the Baptist was equated for in making the way for Jesus when he came first.
So how do we, listening to you and reading Revelation, how do we get to that point where the people of the earth, the majority of them, are going to hate the two witnesses? They're going to hate the word of God. This has something to do, in my opinion, to 2 Thessalonians 2:3, the falling away. It seems like today more and more people are recognizing, which is unfortunate, that churches are more into the positive thoughts of energy, prosperity gospel.
Yes.
And then you have the other side, and that has to do with New Age concepts, the power of positivity. Then you have the Christ consciousness, and you have the quantum people saying, oh, well, if you have enough faith, you can pop quiffs, which is a quantum term. And you have this Christ consciousness and this ancient alien astronaut theory that's, telling people that science is God, that you can transform your consciousness into another reincarnation, so you don't have to be saved, or there's no God. You are your own God. So I think, in my opinion, Gary, that this is probably the start of the Enochian mysticism that will lead us into this time when people are going to fall away and say, well, I don't need God because there's too many constraints. You can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do whatever makes us feel good.
Exactly. And for people that are listening to us out there, if you take 2 Thessalonians 2, and lay that over on what Jesus said in terms of the chronology, it fits perfectly. And that he begins that off by saying, you're not going to have the gathering back to him, and he's not coming until you have this falling away. And that's apostasy or apostasia. And it's a falling away. It's a turning away from the faith. So there's going to be a destruction of Christianity that Babylon on its rise is going to do with its false prophets. And you're going to have a significant piece of the organized, institutionalized Christianity be folded into this Babylon religion. And it's only going to be those who have studied the Word of God in depth and in detail who aren't going to be deceived with all of these different deceptions that are coming, that are going to be standing up against it. But that starts the persecutions, right? That starts even as Babylon is rising in 3 years before the start of the last 7 years. You're going to have that persecution, but it gets worse. By the time of the first 3.5 years, in terms of the affliction and the terrible things that Luke is talking about, that's going to happen in that same period to people who believe in God and stand up for the testimony of Jesus, which is how it's described that they're going to be killed in Revelation 7. It is going to be absolutely horrendous, but yet it's not as bad as what's coming in the last 3.5 years. So you have all of that sort of taking place. And then when you start mixing in the Christ consciousness aspect, which is an incarnation, as the New Age likes to have with the Christ consciousness, and that it's a bringing in of the spiritual entity into you, it's going to produce an Antichrist-like beast system before Antichrist takes power and physically links you into that. It's within that belief system is this merging with the divine consciousness, as they like to call it, the Atman. And this is a counterfeiting of the Holy Spirit, but it's not fully implemented until the Mark implant system fully allows that thing to come into you, which happens at the midpoint. And it's the source of all knowledge is what they're going to be promising that. And source of, that knowledge can do all sorts of things in the digital world, at the digital level, at the quantum level, that can affect your complete DNA. But it's that counterfeiting of the Holy Spirit by the time that the Antichrist comes along with that mark that really sort of crosses that threshold of whether or not you're going to go by accepting it and worshiping Antichrist and Satan, that you're going to receive the mark of the beast and be punished in the lake of fire forever. So we're going to have lots of mark beast systems lookalikes, but until that midpoint, it's not fully in place. So we have to be careful of that as well. So you have all of this that's going to be coming into play. And now you mix in the alien deception,
Right.
which is going to be part of the whole delusions of these great delusions that Second Thessalonians talks about in chapter 2 as well, that they need to have a cover story for the fallen angels and perhaps some of the demons, or perhaps even if there's a recreation of giants for the end time. They have to explain where they come from. There's also a belief that a lot of the aliens that we see, like the gnomes or the gray aliens, or the salamander reptilian beings, are going to be represented as different kinds of aliens, just as angels can have a shape-shifting capability as well. There needs to be an explanation that fits in with what the world's been prepared for to accept the delusion. So you've got different levels of these aliens, just as in the alien mythos, we get a hierarchy of more powerful ones and less powerful ones, and that they're going to be saying, you need to sit at this galactic table of aliens and fight for your freedom from this oppressive God of the Bible who wants to keep you out of, away from knowledge and in slavery. And that's all part of it as well. And they have to make that cover story because they're going to start showing up. I mean, you have angels not in the abyss, but if they want to give the power to Babylon and give power to Antichrist later, they have to become visible and be active. Then you're going to have, before the midpoint of the last 7 years, you've got the abyss opening. So now you've got the worst of those fallen angels and those demons rising before the midpoint. That's going to give Antichrist his power, just as the two witnesses are going to be killed by the one who comes up out of the abyss, which is also in Revelation 17 associated with Antichrist as well as being the eighth empire, as he's the one who comes up out of the abyss. So there's going to be some sort of avatara effect, which is that incarnation of that Christ consciousness. So where I get that from is, let's use Vishnu, who is a creation of the divine essence, this nebulous female goddess with this other force that creates the gods in Hinduism, incarnated several times, like probably 16 times, and one of them was Buddha. Yeah. And so it would be the reincarnated Buddha, and that's the avatar as the angel Avatara. We get that concept in the Bible with Satan entering Judas to betray Jesus. So we know that can happen, and it provides extra power. But you also will have demons that will maybe possessing kings and taking over those bodies and doing things as well, just as you have demons coming out of the false prophet and out of Antichrist to gather the armies for war at Armageddon. So you have all of that sort of intermixing in, and they have to have a reasonable explanation on how it fits in to the deception that they're selling. And again, we see everything sort of moving towards it. You even hear the Vatican talking about baptizing aliens.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
no kidding.
I read that.
All kinds of weird stuff comes out of that guy's mouth now.
Also there's I forget the verse, but it says that that flock has to be brought back into the fold, and I think it's gosh, I forget his name. He's a Monsignor at the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
He says that that flock, basically what he's alluding to are these space brothers, and that's what the New Age calls them. They call them space brothers.
Yeah, the space brothers, and even a lot of people in the circle. Even a lot of people in the circle now, people that call themselves Christians are starting to call, the angels or the aliens, those are our brothers and our sisters, and yeah, it's starting to get a little weird.
Yeah, Gary. So what is your opinion on this Nordic this Nordic race that people report seeing, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, tall, muscular,
very porcelain skin.
Yeah, it was Travis Walton that mentioned those things too when he was allegedly abducted.
Well, you can imagine that description as being very similar to the white elves that are talked about in Lord of the Rings, as opposed to the smaller fairy folk, right? Only they're not quite as big as in there as they're depicted, but they have that pale white skin. They have blonde hair or red hair. They have blue eyes or hazel-colored eyes.
Wow.
This is the description of the Nephilim and the Rephaim. And specifically, when you're in the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, red-hair, hazel-eyed group, you're into the Tuatha De Danann, or the Datanu, as they're called in the Ugaritic texts of the Rapiu. They're described as such. And, you know, the population of Atlantis and the rulers in particular were described as blonde hair, blue eyes, Aryans, and red hair and hazel eyes as well. So this is a common understanding as to who these are. So if we're actually going to see them as aliens coming back, then that means there's survivors or there's a recreation. But if they're going to show that they were able to save the little people, the fairies and the gnomes as part of that, and the salamanders, which could be, again, some other recreation, or they could have been a saving of the serpent or the Nahash in Eden before he lost his arms and intelligence and everything else. So they might have an ability to keep these individuals in another dimension and in Sheol or Hades or the other world as it's described biblically, or they're in stasis, or there's going to be another creation. Somehow, some way, if they're going to reveal those ones, then they're going to have to have a way of survival or recreation. And it's also interesting that the Anunnaki are talked about in the alien mythos as well. The Anunnaki are depicted in their reliefs in Sumeria, and you had the Anunnaki of heaven, which are these bird-faced cherubim watchers. That's one of the faces of the cherubim. Also, they're shown same depictions with a face of a man. That's and the same wings and everything. That's another face of a cherubim. And you have the giants that were their offspring that were called the Shining Ones that are described the same way. But there's also a black-haired variety of those that are also depicted in the four, what we'll call the Indo-Aryan sub-branches that show up after the flood. One of them is the black-haired ones. And I think that those ones actually might come from the cherubim watchers with the human face.
So, go ahead, Dan.
Well, yeah, and there's also, I think some people miss this, Gary. Ezekiel 27 speaks on, are these little people here? I believe it's Ezekiel 27. It talks about they lay their shields around about. Let's see here. I think they're called the Gammadims.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear you on that.
Yeah, the little people in Ezekiel 27.
The Gammadim.
Gammadims.
Gammadim, there you go. That's what I was looking for too. Jeez.
Yes. And that comes from the Hebrew word gamad. And these are warriors that are in the towers of Tyr that are defending it. And gamad is Hebrew word for a cubit, 18 inches. So these are little people. So if people are looking for little people in the Bible, you've got some Gammadim that's fighting with these Rephaim kingdoms in the Old Testament. And you get another term in the New Testament that's talked about the rudiments or the elementals. So this is used in two terms, as an elemental piece of the universe and as those who rule. This is a reference to the lowest order of the hierarchy of the rebellious angels, which are the elementals. And they include the three little people as three of those groups, and then the salamanders, which are a little bit larger, and they're below in that hierarchy, the Nephilim and the Rephaim. but they're all creations of the fallen angels. So those are types of peoples that we're likely to see. And there is a rebellious host, and there's a lot of angels that rebel. Like Revelation says, 10,000 times 10,000 angels are before God, and if a third of them rebel, that would be, depending on how you want to calculate the 100 million as a third, is that 50 million, or is that 33 million, or is that an allegorical number? Doesn't matter. It's a huge number of angels that will rebel. And that's the host, rebellious host, which is the Hebrew word Saba, which means an army of angels, which has rank and order. So you've got many ranks of angels. You've got the 4 watcher angels. You've got the dunamis. You've got the exousia. You've got, I won't go through the whole hierarchy of the Greek names for them, but they're there to give us those ranks and understand that there's a complete hierarchy, and the spurious offspring of these fallen angels are at the bottom end of that hierarchy. They are the visible ones versus the invisible ones that we deal with.
Yeah. Really quick, Gary, I had a question. Me and my dad were kind of going over this the other day on Revelation 2:13, where it says, "I know thy works, where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is, and thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth." So my question was, if I'm correct, was he martyred in Geneva, where CERN is located today, in that location?
I don't think so. I think you could probably make a case for that. I mean, CERN is, it's over a polytheist holy site, right?
Yeah.
This is the temple of Apollo, or Apollyon, that was built there, and in their belief system, there's a place in the inner earth in a different dimension, right? And this would be like a portal to that, but there's portals to these things all over the world. So that's just one of the sites that they have. So I think if you're looking at a place where Revelation is talking about, I would look towards Jerusalem on that.
Okay. I just thought it was a big coincidence if that was the case, because that would be CERN is at today, and then but yeah, I just want your opinion on that.
Yeah, another place I would look for would be Mount Hermon at the Pan Temple, and the gateway to the gods. So that would be the other place. And so it would be something that's important to where the seat of Satan is. And if there's a mountain of the assembly for the Council of the Gods in Psalms 82, one deduces it's probably at Mount Hermon. So that would be the other location.
Yeah, definitely.
Getting back into the beginnings of the end times, we see more and more people, especially on social media, photographs, narcissism, lovers of themselves. And as you know, Gary, there's a good passage. It's 2 Timothy 3:2.
Yep.
For people be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, and unholy. And we're seeing more and more of that. At least I am seeing more and more of this narrative, and it seems like it's furthering itself along. I don't know what drives people to narcissism, but it's out there, and the love of money. I see postings. I even see postings from supposed Christian ministries on Facebook, and a lot of them promote different passages, and they talk about how do you make money. God wants to be wealthy, and I get all that, but that's not what the Word of God is really about. What's your opinion on this whole social media, and how do you believe it's furthering along the end times?
Hello?
I think we need to take that passage in Timothy very seriously and match that up with that fig tree generation that Jesus was referring to, and that there's a specific generation that has been reserved for the end time, and a wicked generation that is being prepared for the end time. But it's being prepared again by the globalist forces. So they are developing all of the technologies and doing everything to prepare people to accept their deceptions. So you can expect to see more and more and more of that. I mean, just look at how the violence is increasing immensely,
Yes.
Around the world as the liberal dystopia policies become more and more prevalent, and the liberal progressive theology takes place more and more into manifested law. It just makes things worse, and they keep doubling down on doing more of what makes things worse because things don't get better. So that's a generation that will have been so well prepared that by the time of Babylon's rising, I think you're going to see a lot of pharmakeia that's involved that's going to dumb people down as well. And if you look at Revelation 18:23, it's talking about, and this is at the destruction, but Babylon was permitted to lead the world astray through her sorceries. And that's the Greek word pharmakeia, which can mean magical spells, it can mean pharmaceuticals, and it can mean chemically made drugs of all sorts of form, legal or otherwise. And those seem to be the devices that is being used. So I would expect to see more of this open drug use, both prescribed and unprescribed, to dumb down the people and to make them more open to receiving demonic spirits, because so many times drugs are used to opening up those portals. So you're going to see more demonic activity through the people as well. But this is all starting to work hand in hand. And it becomes just so ludicrous to think that this thing can keep feeding on itself, that you'll be an enemy of the state because you don't want to continue down this path of destruction. But this really isn't a path of destruction. There's this promised utopia, but it never comes because it's only dystopia.
Right. That is so true. You hit the nail right on the head. Now, with technologies and medical and biomedicals and stuff, I wonder how long this world is in creating the new man, regarding super soldiers or upgrading our DNA.
Oh, they're already doing it.
Yeah. So I mean, Gary, what's your feeling on that, on this new man concept? Making us live longer, and you know what? It could also be enticing though, because if someone has an ailment, that's terminal, and they come and say, hey, well, you know what? We can upgrade your DNA, we can eradicate that.
Make
we
you
can
stronger, make you faster.
Yeah.
And we see that
revision.
We see that in the CRISPR-9 cast little gadgets.
You have to upgrade that to the $6 trillion man.
Yeah.
Inflation.
Not bad.
Well, and that's one way of promising godhood. I mean, you have to offer immortality in the physical world and unlimited knowledge. To be like a god. And so they're going to have to come up a way with it. So it's either through that sort of transhumanism to do it, or it's through clones, or continuous healing through the pharmakeia and the implants that they're going to be providing to do that, and connected into this greater beast system that supplies all of the knowledge, which allows the invasion of that divine essence into you to totally change you from within, at the quantum level, at the building blocks level, at the gene level, all the way through. So I think it's one of those things that sort of just has to sort of be in place, that if you want people to do what they're going to ask them to do, to go to perpetual war and fight for your freedom against this powerful God of the Bible, they're going to have to offer godhood in this physical world. And that is their challenge. And so you see this technology advancing today, and we're seeing some of it, but we're not seeing the full library of that knowledge that they've developed. And I think it also answers the question is when you get into the last 7 years and into the war of Revelation 9, which I think is the Gog War of Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Joel 1 and 2, because the creatures that are described in this war are similar, and you've got these references to in Ezekiel 38 to Gog, which is in Magog. Gog's not in the table of nations anywhere, and this is Gog, the chief prince of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech, referring to Moscow as you take that through its etymology. But Gog is a offspring of a fallen angel before the flood, of Iapetus, just as Magog and Albion are, and other giants. But those would be the most famous ones coming out of England in their history of prehistory. So you have all of these different things that are going on, but these weapons of war in that 200 million man war, and the ones that are described in Joel 1 and 2, this is from DNA manipulation. This is a chimera war beast being that is being developed for war that is already underway. We just don't know how far along that they are. So if they're able to create chimera type of beings for war, what else can they do with the human body that they're planning? And what else can they do in combination with transhumanism and with cloned bodies? I think all of that comes together in something really scary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a nightmare. It's like a science fiction movie. Go ahead.
Yeah, those creatures are the way they're described. It's absolutely just, horrific. The New Agers call this the Age of Aquarius, a time ruled by Saturn. And Saturn can be, I guess, different deities, right? Maybe Shemiyaza, maybe Azazel. What's your take on this new Age of Aquarius and how the New Age promotes it?
Well, that age is an age of judgment in polytheism and an age and a destruction by fire, just as it is described in the end time in the Bible. Saturn is sort of the chief god in the seven wandering stars. The wandering stars is a biblical term, but it's the same sort of seven major gods of all pantheons around the world. They tend to have post-diluvian gods' names in there as well as antediluvian. So it's a bit of a mix, but it's the same seven. And at the top is the chief god of the pantheon, but not Satan generally. So I would probably look at that more as an Azazel type of individual, with Satan sitting above that, just as Satan sits above the council of gods in Psalms 82. So I think when we start to look at the type of imagery that we're going to be receiving, we're going to become indoctrinated in more of this type of understanding so that it's, again, more easily accepted by the people as we get closer to the last 7 years.
Yeah, agreed. Sure agree with that. There's so many things going on now. Now, moving back to the birth pangs, we see the as you explained earlier, the globalists want a one world government, the whole passport. Now, do you feel that the recent pandemic we went through is just a softening of the target, us, the people of the earth?
I think they're going to do it a lot more now that they did it once.
Yeah.
They could do it over and over.
Right. So, are we looking at something, getting worse, another, maybe another pandemic that's going to be much more severe?
Well, absolutely. Whether or not it comes through biological weapons in a war, or it comes through the release of, contrived, created, targeting viruses similar to what we've seen in the last pestilence. So I would expect to see more of that. And now we're hearing reports of companies like Pfizer, particularly with Project Veritas in the last week, where Pfizer is going on their own to try and manipulate the coronavirus to create different variants, and so that they can provide the solution, provide the problem, and then provide the solution. You've got NIH refunding in different countries now with gain of function, even though they reimagine that term into something else so it doesn't legally violate their laws, but they're doing the same work. It's that doublespeak that the left likes to do, and they're funding that in other countries now. So they're not stopping, and I think they are taking a lot of notes and lessons as to what worked and what didn't work in the last go around, because they're going to use that type of catastrophe to move things forward. But working alongside of that is we're seeing like this war in Russia right now, or I mean Russia and the Ukraine, that we're getting deeper and deeper into with no end game. That is going to be. It's going to spread. And if you look at what happens by the time you get into that Revelation 9 war that I equate with Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Joel 1 and 2, you have a group of nations that are working together in the Ezekiel war that happens, say, a year to year and a half before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And you've got places like, Magog, and chief prince of Meshach. I mean, it's talking about this ancient prophecy of the people that are begat by the ancient czars of Kiev, and you have Russia trying to get their holy city back, and Putin, who believes he's part of the Putyanin bloodline, is trying to rebuild that Russian empire, and using imagery like the double eagle Anunnaki, and using Vladimir the Great as a statue and a great czar of the Putyanin bloodline to create one of these new empires. And that is going to be the leader by all accounts in terms of how I understand it today in Ezekiel 38. But you also have China that's rising, who is going to be part of the kings of the East. I don't think they're going to participate in the Gog War, but they're definitely going to be participating in the Armageddon War. And he wants an empire, and they're forming this alliance. So if you've got in Daniel 2, where it describes the metallic empires, versus Daniel 7 that's describing the beast allegory of the empires, you've got two iron legs of the old Roman Empire that this new 10-king, 10-toed empire of the end time is going to extend out of and rise from. And so you've got 2 feet that are operating on, as in two different ends of the world empire, just as Rome was operated out of Constantinople and out of Rome, 2 parts of the East and the West empire of Rome. You're going to see that coming together. So if you look at what the Ukrainian war might be foreshadowing is you have 5 kings that may be opposing the Western ideology of the world order and are going to force it into a compromise through war. So if you've got Russia and China as 2 of them, another one is Persia. And what's interesting about the Persian term is that you have the ancient Persian Empire of Iran and Iraq as known as sort of the visible Persians, but right. The Indo-Aryans who produced the Persian and the Persian Beast Empire, they also settled in the Indus Valley. And what we see going on today is India, probably the second most populous nation on the world, buys all of their oil and natural gas from Russia for the most part. And they're not saying a word. They're going to be forced to go in that alliance. And you can expect to see Iran go into that and take over Iraq as well, and probably a couple other countries, and be part of that alliance. And they're already working together. And you also have Germany, who is probably going to be forming its own group of empire or group of countries for the empire, and that's going to be Gomer of that alliance. And Beth Tagarma is Turkey, and Turkey is already is working as a mediator and working at odds with NATO, and Germany's going to need the resources to survive from Russia, because they'll die through the winters if they don't get enough power, in terms of gasoline and oil and natural gas. So you can see those 5 nations already lining up. That's going to push back against the Europeans and the other groups of nations that are going to be rising. And they've created their own World Bank. They've created their own cryptocurrency. They've created their own credit card system. They will continue to push back. And Russia today, they're not losing the war like the propaganda says. Their dollar is higher than ruble is higher than it's ever been. Oil prices tend to be able to fund their war for as long as we continue on the same type of policies, and their exports seem to be doing better as well. So this whole thing is just beginning, but this is the signs. This is the beginning of those wars and rumors of war. And you've got almost a revolution taking place in Brazil right now and in Peru, and it gets very, very little news. So you're going to see more of this anarchy spread around the world, and we're going to see more of these types of wars. And I think when it's appropriate, because the Chinese, they tend to learn from what other people do, and they're using Russia as a test case for what they want to do. So I think they're going to be waiting for the U.S. and the Europeans to get further in debt, deplete their militaries, and then look for an April or an October month for China to go across and make an amphibian invasion into Taiwan, and they're going to be well on the road to taking their empire as they see they want it. And the West isn't going to be able to do anything about it because they're going to be spent.
Wow. That's amazing. It's also scary, too. Well, Gary, this is, let's conclude this. Let's pick it up again in part 2. This is the end of part 1 regarding the signs of the end times. What we'd like to discuss in the next one is get into the more into the birth pangs, the beginning, the sorrows. We'll go more into that and talk about the seals and the trumpets.
I definitely want to talk about the mark of the beast. Exactly, what's that going to be?
Yeah, the mark of the beast, and we'll get into the Gog War, and we'll get into also, there's so much to cover off, and we want to pick that up again with you.
Absolutely.
Can you let the listeners know how to get a hold of you and your book and your upcoming books?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is through my website. That's the Genesis6conspiracy.com, Genesis6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And on the website, if you go to the media page and you want to contact me, there's a little highlighted line that's at the top that says, if you want to contact me for an interview, clicks onto my email address. So just click on that and you can send me an email to me. That's email address. If people would prefer to write it down from the show here, is Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com, and that's with the number 6, Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com, and you can get a document or ask me a question. If you're looking for a document, just name it by topic. If I've got one, I'll send it to you at no charge. You can also get a hold of my book off the website. It's the easiest way to get it, and the new book will be marketed off the same website, which is going to be the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, and is going to be subtitled How Understanding Prehistory and Rephaim Giants Helps to Understand End Time Prophecy. So it's going to be specifically targeted at Christians and have a lot more prophecy into it and all the defining aspects of prehistory as you take that into end time prophecy. And so if you wanted to buy a book, you can click over to the Buy Now page and get a signed copy. I have a page for the U.S., I have a page for Canada, and I have a page for the rest of the world, or the overseas page if you live outside of Canada or the U.S.